Sir Malcolm, what do you make of what you're hearing?
I think the first point that one must be clear about is that this is another humiliation for President Putin. First of all, to have any mobilization at all, including of reservists, is an admission that he's losing the war, that he hasn't got adequate troops, and also that he has not been able to persuade people to volunteer to join the forces, because they've been trying desperately, including trying to persuade convicts in the prisons to join the army in order to reduce their sentences. So that's all obviously been a farce. And this is now what we're facing.
To you that a humiliated Putin is a dangerous Putin. And he said in that address this morning...
Which was dangerous even before he was humiliated.
Well, I know, but this is like... Yes, go on.
It's a complete disaster from the moment the war began, because he was forced to withdraw from Kiev, the capital, which he thought he was going to take in a few days. He now has lost virtually the whole of the Kharkov Oblast. And he's now having to call out more troops because he knows his existing army is losing every day. That is very bad news for him.
Sir Malcolm, let's join the conversation. We've got our political correspondent Tom Harwood in the studio, and we've got the defence editor at the Evening Standard, who we'll hear from first of all. That's Robert Fox. What do you think, Robert?
Well, I'm amazed. I don't want to play the body language and is he ill game. But he does look under strain, and as you rightly emphasised, Isabel, this was recorded. So I think there's a bit of a hint of somebody telling him what to say. And in the statement, going on for where Sir Malcolm has rightly pointed out how badly prepared and deployed the Russian army is, that he's emphasised the need for training, and the training of the extra forces that they've been feeding in ever since the late spring has been absolutely hopeless. And they've got no trainers. We know that. They put raw recruits into the battle area where they've got nobody around to train them, because a lot of the original formations, which are called BTGs, battalion tactical groups, have been smashed up, and very few are in the original form that they were last February. So while you're trying to fight, it's very difficult to train raw recruits. And Putin seems to be half admitting that in this speech today.
Interesting to analyse his speech, but also, Tom Harwood, to analyse the response of the British government so far. We know a huge number of them, of course, gathered in New York. But any words in response to this breaking news in the last 45 minutes?
Not yet from number 10. I suppose we will hear more words. Of course, the Prime Minister is a little bit early in New York right now, probably asleep. But we are expecting an address from the Prime Minister of the United Nations General Assembly later on today. No doubt the words of that address will now be updated, will now be changed to take account of this new situation. We did know that what Liz Truss was going to say was going to focus on Russia's aggression, on what number 10 has now been consistently calling Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, using that very strong language, trying to create a broader global coalition, and those wavering countries, India and China, trying to bring them more into the fold with the free and democratic West than in the orbit of Russia.
Sir Malcolm, if you were there in New York at the United Nations at the moment and you've got access to President Biden, what happens next? Does the UK need to consult with him? Should they consult with him? Would it be wise to consult with a dual front or declaration on all of this? What do you think, putting your Foreign Secretary hat on, what do you think is happening there now?
Well, what the United States and the United Kingdom are the two firmest friends of Ukraine. Ukraine has many allies throughout Europe, but in terms of providing practical support, military equipment, military training, the United States is obviously in the lead. The United Kingdom is very much second, as President Zelensky was good enough to acknowledge. So I think there will continue to be very close coordination. I think what's also clear is there's a huge amount of intelligence that the United States in particular, but also other countries, are able to obtain about Russian troop movements. And that is what has helped the Ukrainians in their response. They're doing the fighting, but they're doing it with the help of equipment from other countries, but also intelligence. And intelligence is crucial, particularly nowadays when you can see from the air any significant movement of Russian troops on the ground. That is, I think, part of the practical cooperation that is actually helping the Ukrainians take the offensive and begin recovering territory they should never have been
forgive me,
forced to
Malcolm,
lose
for
in the past.
interrupting. Can I just follow on with that? Absolutely right. And one of the things that we correspondents have not been following nearly enough, this is the first big digital war that Europe has seen. And as you rightly say, the information aspect, ISTAR, the targeting technology, the electronic warfare, and the contribution of US, and rightly, as you've pointed out, UK, has been enormous. And it's given, in so many aspects, on the ground, it has given the Ukrainians the cutting edge. Because, as you say, they can see, they can anticipate. That's why Russia, currently, as we're speaking now, is very nervous about what's going on in and around Crimea.
So, Malcolm Rifkin?
We lost him.
Yeah, no, you've got me. If you're wanting me to add to that, I'm very happy to do so, because what is now credible is that it will be slow, but the Ukrainians now have a prospect of encircling the Russians in Kherson. They've already blocked the Russians from reinforcing Kherson, which is in the south, near Crimea, near the coast. And that will also mean yet another part of occupied Ukraine. I think slowly, it will take weeks, possibly even months, but will slowly be recovered by the Ukrainians. And I very much endorse the point that has been made by my colleague on your program, that the inability of the Russians to actually train the people they've got means that the Ukrainians will not have to face these new reservists being brought back. Some of them, if they bring out all the reservists, some of them will be quite elderly people, but let's assume they concentrate on the younger ones. These are not professional soldiers. These are people who have served in national service in Russia, as everyone has to do for a period of time. And they will both be very hostile to being brought back with the prospect of being killed or injured, but they also will be way out of training, and both physically, I suspect, as well in the military sense. So it will be months before they could even begin to have any impact on the conflict. I think Putin knows that, but he's got to actually demonstrate that he's doing something more to at least theoretically give the Russians a better chance of recovering the offensive.
This address to Malcolm Rifkin being described as a significant escalation, the language being taken extremely seriously, Putin reserving the right to use nuclear weapons will be hugely alarming to people waking up this morning. Do you think we are one step closer to a possible nuclear war? I mean, just a few weeks ago...
No, I think that remains as unlikely as it was 24 hours ago. Putin has always been willing to use this sort of blustering language. But, you know, not only would nuclear weapons risk a response with nuclear weapons, because the United States in particular could not just ignore that, and Putin will be aware of that, but he would also entirely lose the support of China and India and other countries in Africa and Asia who have tried to remain more neutral in these matters, because the last thing they want is this crisis. We saw just a few days ago India and China trying to say to Putin, we have concerns about what's going on here. This war shouldn't be continuing. Now, if they're saying that already, you don't need me to say how hostile they would be any suggestion of using nuclear weapons if that came from Moscow.